Hello. I'm not sure if anyone really knows how these things are supposed to begin. I certainly don't. I always feel like I'm interrupting something, even when I'm alone in the room. But I'll try to start the same way I always do, by saying who I am and where I'm standing now. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 78 years old. I live by myself in the same house my wife and I moved into decades ago, back when it felt full of noise and plans. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 2 years ago. We were married for 51 years. Sometimes that number still surprises me. It sounds solid, impressive even, but when I think about it honestly, I don't think in years anymore. I think in moments, and how many of them I let slip by without really noticing. The title of this video says something about life lessons fixing problems. I didn't choose those words myself. I'm not sure I would have. My youngest son, David, helped me set this up, and I think he thought it sounded hopeful, cleaner than the truth. I don't know that anything was ever fixed exactly. Some things just became clearer after everything else fell away. For most of my life, I thought problems were things you solved by doing more, working harder, staying busy, keeping your head down. That was how I was raised. My father believed silence was strength, and exhaustion was proof you were doing your duty. I absorbed that without questioning it. By the time I met Eleanor, it was already part of me. We met young. I was 26. She was 24. She laughed easily, not loudly, just honestly. She asked questions that didn't always have obvious answers. I remember thinking she saw things I didn't, or maybe things I chose not to look at. When we got married, I promised myself I'd give her a good life. I meant stability, a roof, security. I didn't realize then that she would need something quieter and much harder to provide. We had 2 sons. Michael came first, then David a few years later. The house changed overnight. Toys on the floor, noise at the dinner table, schedules written on scraps of paper stuck to the refrigerator. I threw myself into work. It felt necessary, responsible. Eleanor stayed home with the boys when they were young, then worked part-time later. She managed the emotional weather of the house. I managed the practical things, or so I told myself. Looking back, I see how many of my problems were actually avoidances. I avoided discomfort. I avoided conversations I didn't know how to finish. I avoided sitting still long enough to feel something complicated. And every time I did that, I thought I was keeping things under control. One evening, I remember, Eleanor asked me a simple question. We were washing dishes. She was drying. I was stacking them. She said, "Are you happy?" Not accusing, not dramatic, just curious. I laughed a little and said, "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" And that was the end of it. We went on with our evening. That question followed me for years, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't want to look at it too closely. I thought happiness was something you earned later, after the kids were grown, after work slowed down, after things settled. I thought it was nasty, irresponsible to ask for it in the middle of a busy life. Michael and David grew up. They became teenagers, then adults. They learned how to navigate the house by watching us, by watching me. Michael was outgoing, but he learned to keep emotional things light around me. David learned to handle things on his own. I took pride in that. Independence, I called it. Strength. Years later, I'm not so sure. Eleanor was patient, more patient than I deserved. She didn't push. She adjusted. She found ways to feel fulfilled that didn't depend on me changing. She had friends. She read constantly. She found beauty in small routines. I mistook her resilience for contentment. I didn't realize she was carrying the weight of two people's emotional lives. The strange thing is, I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong. That's the part I struggle with now. There was no big mistake, no explosion, no betrayal, just a slow narrowing of life. Fewer conversations, fewer risks, fewer moments where I showed up fully. And because it happened gradually, I never thought to stop it. The problems I thought I had back then, money, work stress, minor arguments, exhaustion, they felt enormous at the time. I spent years trying to manage them, fix them, stay ahead of them. And in doing so, I missed what was actually slipping away. When Eleanor got sick, everything rearranged itself. Pancreatic cancer doesn't give you time to negotiate. The doctor spoke in careful sentences, and I understood immediately that we were running out of something I'd always assumed was endless. The house changed again, not with noise this time, but with equipment, pills, appointments, quiet. I became attentive then. I learned how to sit, how to listen without planning my response, how to be present without trying to solve anything. And I hated how natural it started to feel, knowing I could have done this all along. One afternoon while she was resting, she reached for my hand. Her grip was weak, but intentional. She said, "You know, you were always trying so hard." I asked her what she meant. She smiled a little and said, "To keep everything together." That was all. No accusation, no bitterness, just an observation. That sentence did more to me than any argument ever could have. After she died, the problems I'd spent my life worrying about vanished, not because they were solved, but because they no longer mattered. Work was irrelevant, schedules were empty, the house was quiet, and what remained were the things I had neglected because they didn't feel urgent enough. People sometimes ask me now, gently, what I learned, as if there's a neat answer, something they can apply and move on with. I don't know how to give them that. The truth is, most of the lessons that helped me weren't insights. They were losses. Losing Eleanor stripped away my illusions. It showed me that many of my problems were self-constructed, that my constant busyness was a shield, that my silence was fear dressed up as responsibility, that my idea of strength had cost me intimacy. Michael came to see me a few months after the funeral. We sat in the living room, the same one where Eleanor used to sit with her books. He looked uncomfortable. Older than I remembered, he told me he wished he'd talked to his mother more near the end. I told him she knew he loved her, and I meant it. Then he looked at me for a long moment and said, "Did you ever tell her how you felt?" I said yes. It wasn't exactly true. It wasn't exactly a lie either. It was just easier than explaining. David calls more often now, short conversations, practical check-ins. He asks if I'm eating properly, if I'm taking my medication. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling, and I don't offer. Some habits survive even the biggest losses. If I'm honest, the thing that fixed most of my problems wasn't learning how to do something new. It was finally understanding what I had been avoiding, understanding that presence isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's uncomfortable. It asks you to sit with things you can't improve or fix or explain away. I don't wake up every day feeling enlightened. Some days I still fall into old patterns. I keep conversations short. I distract myself. I avoid thinking about certain memories because they hurt. The difference now is that I notice it. I feel the cost of it immediately. There are evenings when I sit in this house and remember Eleanor at the kitchen table, talking, waiting for me to really hear her, and I realize that the problems I thought I was managing back then were never the real ones. The real problem was that I didn't think the present required my full attention. If you're listening to this expecting advice, I don't really have any, and not in the way people usually mean it. I can't give you steps or solutions. I can only tell you that the things you think are problems right now might not be. And the things you're postponing might be the only parts of life that actually count. I didn't understand that until most of my life was already behind me. And even now, understanding it doesn't bring Eleanor back. It doesn't rewrite my son's childhoods. It doesn't fill this house with sound again. It just makes the quiet louder. I don't know what you'll take from this. Maybe nothing. Maybe you'll forget it before the day is over. That's all right. I forget things too. I just know that I spent decades trying to fix the wrong things, and by the time I realized it, the things that mattered most were already memories. That's where I am now. Still here, still learning, still sitting with the parts of life that don't resolve neatly. And some days that has to be enough.